You won the argument. You had the facts, you laid them out, and the other person had absolutely no comeback. The debate is over. But then, 3 days later, you are standing in the shower or driving to work, and your brain abruptly hits play on the exchange, forcing you to relive it all. Normally, humans obsess over mistakes. We replay failures to isolate what went wrong so we can fix it next time. Replaying a total victory makes zero tactical sense. If the external battle is completely over and you came out on top, what exactly is your mind still searching for? This lingering mental loop is a symptom of a hidden, unresolved internal process actively demanding your attention. Clinical psychologists define this specific repetitive thought pattern as cognitive rehearsal. It operates as a rigid defense mechanism. When encountering an external conflict, our brain triggers a defense response to process the threat. Ideally, this leads to a resolution. Here, however, the path loops backward infinitely. Why? Because emotional data contradicts the logic. A validation gap fractures the pathway, permanently blocking resolution. Winning the argument satisfied your logic completely, but the external victory proved insufficient. Cognitive rehearsal is your mind's aggressive attempt to manufacture the internal validation you are still missing. A logical victory requires undeniable evidence. You present facts, you dismantle the opposing timeline, and you effectively silence the other person. Your brain immediately registers this as a tactical success. The immediate external threat standing in front of you has been completely neutralized. But this dual-axis chart shows the massive discrepancy in how your brain processes that win. The trend line for logical satisfaction sharply spikes and plateaus at 100%. Meanwhile, emotional closure remains completely flat, hovering near zero. The emotional centers simply do not receive the same threat-neutralized signal. Factual superiority works perfectly as a shield against the person you are arguing with. It does absolutely nothing to address the turbulent internal state you are left in once they walk away. You can pile on 20 more perfectly reasoned points in your head, but applying more logic to this specific state will not lower your heart rate or ease that residual anxiety. Winning purely on the facts is a hollow victory if the underlying emotional stakes are left unaddressed. Those emotional stakes stem from an emotional wound, a pre-existing insecurity or sensitivity that was there long before this specific conflict ever started. During the exchange, the other person might have lost the debate on the facts, but their words bypassed the logic entirely and struck directly at that hidden vulnerability. Because that wound is still stinging days later, your brain misinterprets the ongoing pain as a signal that the external argument is still actively happening. The obsessive mental replay targets a completely different enemy. You are now fighting the feeling of inadequacy that your opponent briefly exposed. So you keep refining the phantom argument. You invent sharper comebacks and flawlessly restructure the timeline in your head until your defense is completely airtight. This line graph illustrates the psychological law of diminishing returns at play. As the number of mental replays on the x-axis increases, the emotional relief on the y-axis trends steadily downward. By the 100th replay, the simulation provides zero relief. You end up completely exhausted, locked in combat with a phantom opponent constructed entirely by your own mind. An opponent who is entirely incapable of surrendering. Your brain is making a massive categorical error. It is trying to use a tactical weapon, a better argument, to perform psychological triage. As long as your focus remains trapped on the mechanics of the conflict, the mental loop is mathematically incapable of terminating. Stopping the replay requires a specific clinical pivot. You have to forcefully shift your attention away from what the opponent said and look directly at your own internal reaction to it. Dealing with the wound means isolating the exact insecurity that felt threatened. You must identify what specific fear their words triggered, regardless of how factually wrong they were. This is the process of self-validation. True closure requires giving yourself the emotional safety you were unsuccessfully trying to extract from the person who lost the argument. The echo of the argument only falls silent when you recognize that lasting peace comes from internal healing, not retroactive dominance.